Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, yesterday I came across this article on Raw Story about a Georgia state representative, a white man by the name of Jason Spencer, threatening a former state representative by the name of LaDawn Jones. You see her picture here. She's an African American attorney, and they had an exchange on Facebook. And I'm just going to go through the exchange and then I'm going to provide my commentary. I will post links to all these stories in the description box so that you can read them for yourself. But here, this man, Jason Spencer, again, who's a state representative, he is not just some private citizen expressing his views, he is a policymaker. So this man posted these photographs of him posing at the Jefferson Davis Memorial, posing and showing off these photos and all that kind of stuff. And basically talking about how this is Georgia's history, deal with it. And for those of you who don't know, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. He was a slave owner. He owned many slaves. And we all understand what the Confederacy was about. The Confederacy was all about defending the institution of slavery, defending the right to enslave African people, defending the right to beat African people, defending the right to sell black people and rape black people, abuse black people, castrate black people. That's what they were fighting for. These people were traitors of the nation. They betrayed the nation. They committed acts of treason. They declared war on the very government that they pledged allegiance to. And that civil war resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. But yet you have people today honoring these traitors, honoring these slaveholders, honoring these people who fought and died for the right to enslave black people. And this man posted this picture, where he's posing next to these Confederate monuments and all that kind of stuff. And he's saying, this is Georgia's history, deal with it. And the timing is very important here because this follows the events that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia, where you had these white supremacists protesting against the possible removal of another Confederate monument, a monument to Robert E. Lee, a Confederate general. So you had those white supremacists there, behind this Unite the Right rally where many people were injured at the hands of white supremacists. One person was killed by these white supremacists. At this time, when all this stuff is going on, you have this state representative posing next to these Confederate statues. And that just tells you the mindset of these people. I mean, it tells you the Confederate mindset of some of these policymakers. It tells you the racist mindset of these people. So after this man posted these photographs and made his comments about this is Georgia's history, deal with it, this sister, LaDawn Jones, responded, basically saying, well, these things are coming down and the taxpayer dollars shouldn't be spent on this stuff. And then this guy basically says, well, he sits on this committee that deals with games, fish, and parks, and it's not going anywhere. And the sister goes on to talk about our history of 400 years of slavery, 30 years of Jim Crow. And she's saying that the Confederate statues are leaving. Hate is going to be done, and the flag, the Confederate flag is going to be gone, and all that kind of stuff. And then this man, Jason Spencer, basically says, well, folks here in southern Georgia are not going to put up with that kind of opposition to these Confederate statues. They're not going to do what people do in Atlanta, for instance. And as people know, Atlanta is a predominantly black city. So basically he's saying that these people in South Georgia are not going to put up with that. They're not going to allow the state to take down those Confederate statues. And as we know, Georgia is in the South. Georgia was a part of the Confederacy. Georgia has a long history of racism and bigotry and all that kind of stuff. So the sister is just talking about how these things are going to come down, and People are not going to be intimidated by some torches. They're not going to be intimidated by these white supremacists. They're going to unite. And she talks about like people of all different races uniting against hatred. So this guy complains about people trying to erase history. You know, he talks about how you won't be met with torches, you'll be met with something more definitive. And he talks about how the people in South Georgia are people of action, not drama. Basically, he's threatening this woman. He's basically saying that if you do this stuff, if you try to take down these statues, something's going to happen. People are not going to engage in drama. They're going to really do something. And then he goes on to say this. He talks about how there are rednecks in that area. And he basically says that this sister may come up missing. You know, people who try to take down these statues and stuff like that may come up missing in a swamp. A threat. This is a threat coming from a state representative. So I want to take some time to talk about this, man. So you have a state representative essentially threatening another state representative, a former state representative, an African-American woman, an African-American attorney with possible lynching. He's threatening her with a possible lynching. Basically saying that there are a lot of rednecks down south in Georgia and that she could come up missing. And when I thought about that, when I heard him say that, when I read these statements, the first thing I thought about was these civil rights workers who ended up missing in Mississippi. These civil rights workers who were fighting for voting rights, fighting for basic civil rights for African Americans, they came up missing. They were killed. And, you know, their bodies were hidden and all that kind of stuff. That's what I thought of when I heard or read that this man threatened this woman. I also thought about Emmett Till, how he was found in a river, how his body was found beaten beyond recognition and in a river. So there's a history tied to these statements that this man is making. This is not a joke. We all know about the history of lynching in this country, where African Americans could be lynched for anything. And when African Americans were lynched, it was like a sporting event for these people. They would gather in mass crowds. Many of them would be smiling. They would have their children there. That's what I thought about when I read this man's statements. Basically threatening to lynch this woman. Basically threatening that this woman could be lynched. And I just think that this is outrageous, man. These people, these white supremacists are in angst. You know, these people are afraid because they see their world crumbling apart. They see that the white supremacy, the whole system is coming to an end. They see the last vestiges of white supremacy. And what they're trying to do is cling on to those. They're clinging on to these monuments of hatred, you know, as their last chance to maintain the system of white supremacy. What we see here in this country is a changing demographic. We see an increase in the so-called minority population. We see that these white people are becoming a minority in this country. Soon, in a few years, white people will no longer be the majority in this country. And many of these white supremacists, they fear so-called white genocide. You know, they fear losing power. They fear seeing these symbols removed because they see it as the end of their world. So they are lashing out. They are resorting to all kinds of desperate measures. And we saw that in Charlottesville, and we're going to see more of that. We saw that with the election of Donald Trump. That was a response to a changing demographic. It was a response to fears of diversity in this country. And that's what this guy is doing. I mean, he is posing with these symbols of hatred, you know, uplifting these symbols of hatred, thumbing his nose at people with these symbols of hatred at a time when there was just a violent incident in Charlottesville. The fact of the matter is, All these statues and stuff like that, they're coming down because there's a new climate today. People are no longer going to accept these symbols of hatred. Now, people like him will say that this is erasing history. Removing these statues is erasing history. That's what they will say. But it is not erasing history. If someone wants to know about the Confederates, if they want to know about the Civil War, they can read that in a history book. If they want to know about the Civil War, they can look at monuments or statues in a museum. They don't have to see these statues in public spaces, on public property. When people erect statues, what they are doing is honoring the people that they depict in the statues. They're saying that these are people who should be respected. These are people who should be celebrated. That's the statement that they're making. That's the values that they are projecting when they create statues of people, when they name buildings and structures after people. That's what they're doing. They're honoring people. So it's not just about some history. It's about honoring people. And the last people that need to be honored are slave owners. The last people who need to be honored are those who fought against their own countrymen in order to maintain an institution of oppression, to maintain a system that deprived black people of every imaginable right, that degraded black people more than any other system of oppression in the world. A system that enslaved black people, raped black people, killed black people, committed genocide on black people, destroyed black families, destroyed black culture, destroyed a people. Those people who fought to maintain that system, those people who fought in a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people, who committed treason, they do not deserve to be honored in 2017. They simply don't. And all people of goodwill should have all these statues and stuff removed. And if they are to remain, they should remain only in museums, not in places of honor. So yeah, these people are fighting to save the last manifestations of white supremacy because, again, there's changing demographics, there's a shift in political power and influence. And this came, this whole change of attitude towards these Confederate images came after you had Dlynn Roof going to a church, Charleston, South Carolina, and kill 9 innocent people as they were praying. 9 innocent African Americans as they were praying. And the symbols that this man used, Dlynn Roof, were a lot of Confederate symbols. He had Confederate flags, posing with them. It is not a coincidence that these white supremacist groups pose with Confederate flags, use Confederate symbols, because that is a symbol of racism and oppression. And those symbols of racism and oppression should not be elevated in public spaces. They need to be removed from public spaces because they are contrary to the values that this country purports to believe in. So yeah, that's what I think about that, man. So I don't have any sympathy for these people who are crying about their history being erased because their history is not being erased. These same people that cry about history being erased, they don't have any problem with black history being erased. They don't have any problem erasing the accomplishments of black people, erasing the achievements of black people, erasing the history of black people, but yet they're crying when people want to remove these racist statues from public spaces. And this whole thing is really larger than these physical statues and monuments and stuff like that. It reflects a mentality. It reflects an attitude. It reflects values. And that's what makes it so dangerous. That's what makes it so problematic. That you have state legislatures, you have state officials, you have local officials who honor these symbols. And that tells you about their politics. The whole thing with this guy, the thing that's more frightening, than this guy simply posing with some pictures is the fact that this man is a policymaker. Someone who implements policies that affect people's lives. This is a man who is passing laws, who is forming laws. A man who honors symbols of racism, forming laws. A man who threatens a black woman with possible lynching, has the power to affect public policy. That should be frightening to all of us. It's very frightening. I mean, this man is unfit to serve, and he should be removed from office. At the very least, this guy should be censored for making these comments, basically threatening the life of this black woman, LaDawn Jones. He should be censored at the very least. And this is why elections matter. I'm going to always emphasize the importance of elections. People like this need to be voted out of office. People like this do not deserve to serve in state legislatures. And the only way to get these people out of office is to vote. And that's what we need to do. And he's probably in a safe district where most of the people in his district are conservative Republicans and all that kind of stuff. So it may be difficult to remove him. But the people, even in those conservative districts, they need to ask themselves, do they want to be associated with racism? Do they want to be associated with slavery? Do they want to be associated with a man who is celebrating these Confederate symbols shortly after a major demonstration where white supremacists killed a person and injured many people? Do they want to be associated with that? Or do they want to have a mainstream candidate representing their district? So these people need to be voted out. And again, this is why elections matter. And this is why each and every one of us needs to register, and we need to vote in every single election. In every single election, on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And I'll just conclude on this note. I think that this man should be investigated for making these statements. His ties to different groups need to be investigated, because this is a serious matter. I showed you examples of people being lynched for standing up for different issues. Like you had the civil rights workers, and then you had Emmett Till lynched for simply allegedly flirting with a white woman. So those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.